After taking a deep dive into the settings and how that affects the outcome of your photo, I'll make sure to link that video in the description. I wanted to make a video explaining how the focal length and your relation to where the subject is, how that all affects the outcome of the photo as well. So I took a few test shots, all of them are at f5.6. They're all the exact same settings, just different focal length, and a couple of them are me positioning the camera a little different. So let's just jump in and compare what that looks like. If you look at where my mouse is right now, this is how you can tell what lens we're looking at. So this is the RF 70-200 f2.8L at 200 millimeters. So 200 millimeters, 5.6, and that background is beautiful. It's just blurred out, that separation, it looks great. And the subject looks sharp, like it looks really good. And this is something I really like about telephoto, is that at f5.6, we're getting that separation. It looks really good. So now this is 135 millimeters. We're still getting that separation, but we're getting a lot more of the background in there now. A lot of the subject is sharp and in focus. So if we look in comparison here, if I just crop in, so I cropped the photo in to try to match that 200 millimeters, and as you can see, the separation is a bit different. The camera is at the exact same location, just different focal length, and the separation is different. So this tells us that the higher the millimeter in focal length, the more background blur we're going to get at the same f-stop if our camera is in the exact same location. So let's move on here. We got 100 millimeters now, still getting some background separation, but as we can see, it's starting to get a little more sharper and sharper as we progress. So 200, 135, 100, just slowly getting more and more in focus. This is at 70 millimeters now. This is the RF 70-200 still. All of these photos so far have been the RF 70-200 2.8. So at 70 millimeters, we're starting to get a little bit more stuff in focus. Looks really good though. And now we're looking at the RF 24-70 2.8 at 70 millimeters as well. This is just me wanting to see what the difference looks like between these two lenses. So going back and forth, it looks like the 70-200 looks a bit more cropped in. It also looks like the 70-200 is a little bit lighter, but there's more distortion on the 70-200 and there's less distortion on the 24-70 at 70 millimeters. So at 70 millimeters, I would probably still go with the 24-70 if I'm doing something like a portrait shot, just me personally, unless I wanted that distorted look. That being said, profile correction often, evens a lot of this stuff out. So 50 millimeters, we're seeing more and more of that background just slowly coming into focus. Less and less bokeh, less and less background separation. Even when we zoom in, we're seeing that these magic cards are starting to get a little bit more, like, I can almost tell what some of these are. Actually, I can't tell what some of those are now. But at 200 millimeters, I have no clue. I couldn't tell you what any of these magic cards are. So your focal length heavily affects the background separation. Now we're looking at 35 millimeters, more and more slowly starting to come into focus. Really? I'm able to tell what guitars these are, what cards these are. I'm seeing more and more of the background. All of this, same settings, f5.6. The settings haven't changed, just the focal length. So 35 millimeters, this is a wide angle, not a lot of distortion, looks really good. I love using 35 millimeter, especially for video, because low distortion and a lot can be in focus. At 24 millimeters, I took a picture with the 24-70 as well as the 15-35. And as we can see, the 24-70 actually has more distortion than the 15-35 at 24 millimeters. This is to be expected because 24 millimeters is the widest that lens can go. So you're often going to see a bit of that distortion, but with the 15-35, the 24 millimeter mark is a little bit further down, so you're going to get less distortion. So when I'm filming at 24-28 millimeters, I'll often go with the 15-35 over my 24-70 because I'll get less distortion, even at the same millimeter. This goes to show that you have to really explore your lenses, because 5.6, I chose 5.6 because this is something that a lot of kit lenses can do, like 5.6 to like 7.1. You can still get a lot of good background separation. You just got to know how to use it. So let's just keep moving on here. So at 24 millimeters, we're almost able to read some of this fine text, which it's just getting more and more in focus all the way around at the same f-stop. My camera hasn't moved yet, and that's the thing here. My camera has not moved yet. Yes, we're changing focal length, but the camera hasn't moved. So the framing and composition has been drastically different between all of these photos. But so has that background separation, and that's what we're looking at there. At 15 millimeters, you can see that distortion that the 24 millimeters had on the 24-70. when you're at the widest part of the lens, you're going to see that kind of fisheye almost look. 15 millimeters is extremely wide. You're able to see the light stand in this photo, which is great for landscape. It's great for so much when it comes to video. You can capture a ton. At 5.6, let's just zoom in here. We're not getting any more clarity, but 15 millimeters is very, very wide. So what you can kind of gather from this is between 15 and 24, you're kind of getting about the same text clarity, about the same background blur. Just the difference is the 24 is a little sharper because it's cropped in more. But at 15 millimeters, f5.6, most of everything is in focus. You could, like, the poster's in focus, the speaker's pretty in focus, the guitars are in focus, everything is about in focus at f5.6. So when you're using the wider part of your lens, even at f5.6, it's gonna be a lot in focus. So if you want that background separation, if you want that creamy background, even if you can only go to f5.6, even sometimes at f7.1, f11, you can still get this effect. You just gotta use telephoto, or you get closer to your subject. So this is 35 millimeters. My goal here was to try to get it as close as possible to the same framing as 200 millimeters. So with the 35 millimeters, yes, we're getting more distortion because we're really close right now, but we're getting a lot of background separation. When I zoom in, it's about the same. So you can achieve the same results of getting that telephoto background separation just by getting closer to your subject. The caveat being that there is some distortion. So yeah, with a standard portrait shoot, you might just want to use the telephoto because you don't really need to see the background. And you still get some context and you get this beautiful blur. But if you're doing lifestyle photography or you're wanting to tell a story, sometimes it's just kind of cool to get close to that subject. Just get the distortion, lean into it sometimes. I'll go 15 millimeters, get a lot of distortion, get really close and take that photo to get the background in there. And you get a lot in focus, yes, but it tells a story. It's a portrait that's telling you where and what's happening, what's going on. So wide angle portraits is something that I personally like. And I like telephoto portraits. It depends what you're going for. Like, this is why I want to bring this up. This is why I wanted to make this video, because I wanted to give you the creative control over how your image turns out. So if you combine the techniques in this video alongside the techniques I told you in the previous video on how to shoot manual, you have full creative control, really over your photography. You know how your image is going to turn out. So when you're on a shoot and you're like, okay, there's nothing pretty around here, but I need to get my subject, I'm gonna grab the telephoto and I'm gonna go to the widest open aperture, like f2.8 or f4 or whatever your lens can do, because I'm gonna get a bunch of that background separation and my subject's still gonna be sharp. It's gonna look really good and there's not gonna be a lot of distortion. But if I'm doing lifestyle or landscape, often I wanna tell the story. I wanna show the entire atmosphere. So I go for the wide angle. But if I wanna get that wide angle distortion while maintaining, the background in there and still getting some background blur, I'm just gonna get the camera closer to my subject. So you create more background separation or a shallower depth of field by increasing your focal length millimeter, like going from 15 to 200 millimeters, that's gonna give you a big difference, or by decreasing the distance between you and your subject. So by getting closer and closer. This is why macro lenses are so powerful. Here we have the 100 millimeter macro. 100 millimeter is quite the telephoto. It's quite up there. And you can get really close to your subject, so I can get really close to what I'm taking a photo of. This allows you to get results like this, where your background is completely annihilated, but you're able to get really close to your subject and have it extremely sharp. This is still at f5.6. f5.6, and that background, I can't even tell if there's magic cards there. That's the power of macro lenses. It lets you get close, which creates more of that background separation, and it's a cool effect. You get this like 1-to-1 ratio or more, and it's just neat. Lastly, I just want to touch on sensor size. So I use full frame cameras, the EOS R and the EOS R5. So it has a crop factor of 1, meaning a 15 millimeter is a 15 millimeter. However, if you are using a crop sensor camera, your crop factor is going to be anywhere between 1.5 and 1.6. So if you're using a Canon crop sensor, that's 1.6. So 15 times 1.6 equals 24. So 15 millimeters on a crop sensor camera is more like 24 millimeters on a full frame camera. And then you have micro four thirds, which is a crop factor of 2, and medium format, which is 0.5. So it creates less crop. So the advantage of full frame or having less crop factor, it encourages a photographer to get closer to your subject or use a more telephoto lens to get the same results as a crop sensor or micro four thirds, or anything with a crop like a smartphone or something like that. So by having less crop and being able to get closer or use a higher millimeter, you're able to get more and more of that background separation. And that's often why professionals are using full frame cameras, because full frame encourages you to shoot in such a way to produce background blur. All the different sensor types have pros and cons, different advantages and disadvantages. There is no right and wrong sensor type. There is no right and wrong camera, lens choice, nothing like that. But knowing these different things can help you shape your decisions when it comes to buying gear or what you want to do when it comes to photography. If you know you want a lot of background blur, you're gonna wanna maybe look into a full frame camera, because full frame gives you the opportunity, because of its less crop, to get closer or use telephoto, which gives you more background blur even at the same f-stop. So if you wanna kind of figure out the difference there, just apply that times to the f-stop. So f5.6 times 1.6 equals around 9. This means that f5.6 on a crop sensor camera is gonna look more like f9 on a full frame camera. So you get a lot of composing differences and advantages and disadvantages to each sensor type. But what it comes down to is the millimeter, your focal length, and the positioning between you and your subject. So I hope you found this video on focal length and composition helpful. The takeaways here are, the higher the millimeter, the more compression you're going to get. Essentially, this just means that your background's going to be closer in, it's going to be more zoomed in, and it's going to be really blurred out. The wider the lens, the more that's in focus, even at the same f-stop. You can increase the amount of background blur by moving closer to your subject, even with a wide angle lens. And when compared, it is pretty comparable as long as you're able to get the composition roughly the same. We also learned why the 100mm macro is so powerful. It allows someone to both get closer and use a telephoto. And lastly, your sensor size is going to dictate a little bit of this as well. That's why I say every sensor, every lens is different. You need to test your settings out. You need to go to the extremes on both sides when it comes to every setting on your camera, every setting on your lens. And you have to see what works for you, what is your style. So I hope that this video, alongside the how to shoot manual video I did, allows you to take a little bit more creative control over how you shoot photography. You got something from this? Awesome. This is also transferable to smartphones. A lot of smartphones these days have multiple lenses, so you can take this away and use it even there. If you found this helpful, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that lovely stuff, and until next time, peace.